Hi, welcome to a Curve tutorial video. My name is Natan Cohen. I'm the head of customer success here at Curve, and in this video I'm going to show you how to create a backend REST API service for returning a JWT token so you can securely embed any Curve widget, the most common of which would be the dashboard widget. In this tutorial, we're going to be using Node.js as the backend service. Really, you can use whatever backend framework that you like. Node.js is easy to install. It's also very easy to create a REST API backend service. And we also have the sample code to do this on our partner portal. So this tutorial is designed for you to follow along, so let's get started. So the first thing you'll want to do is install Node.js. You can do this by going to nodejs.org, installing the latest version on your machine. And we're also going to use Visual Studio Code as an editor for this exercise as well, so you can download and install that. Once you have it installed, you'll want to open up a terminal or command prompt. You can type node-v, and it will display the latest version. That is, at this time, 24. And then npm-v, at this time, that's 11.5. So that's how you know that both Node and NPM are installed and available from the path, so that we can use more commands once we jump into Visual Studio Code, and that's the next step. The next step is to go to Visual Studio Code. You can go ahead and open that up, and then we're going to go ahead and open a new terminal. Now, it doesn't really matter where you create your project. I went ahead and created a directory called projects. I also created a directory called curve-server, which is where we're going to set up this as a node project. So you can go ahead and create that directory, enter that directory, and then once you're within that directory, you can type in npm init. Okay, and that's going to set up this as a node project. So it's going to go ahead and do that. You can go ahead and just choose the defaults. Now that I've initiated it as a node project, I'm going to go ahead and open that workspace. With the directory open in Visual Studio Code, I'm going to go ahead and add a new file, and I'm going to call it app.js. Okay. And I'm going to import 3 packages or frameworks that are for Node.js that will help simplify this code. The first is the Express framework, which makes the building of REST APIs in Node easier. The second is the Axios framework that makes calling out to other REST APIs easier to do, and that's something that this REST API will need to do so that it can call out to the Curve API and get the JWT token. And the third is the CORS framework, so that we can lock down this REST API and control which servers are allowed to make these requests. All of these frameworks need to be installed via npm. So you can type npm install express, npm install Axios, and npm install CORS. So the first thing I'm going to do is define my library includes. So that's going to be the Axios, Express, and CORS frameworks. And I'm also going to configure this REST API to listen on port 3000. Next thing I will do is define my CORS options. And this is important so that you can lock down this service for only certain clients. I'm going to enable star for the origin. That will permit all clients, but you should definitely lock that down once you know what the origin will be. I'll allow the get and post methods, and then I'm going to use these CORS options Okay, and that instructs the server to use the CORS options that we've defined. And now I'm going to add a listener on the port that we specified, which was port 3000. And the step after adding the listener is to add an endpoint so that we can perform a GET request. You can call it whatever you want. It is a REST API, so I'm going to give it the root path API. And then ultimately, this is going to get a Curve JWT token, so I'm going to give it that name. For now, it's just going to return a simple JSON response with property message saying that the server is working. So with that, we're going to save this file. We're going to open a terminal. We're going to go into the Curve server directory. This is the name of your project, and we're going to start the node server by typing node space app.js. And the next test is to go to a browser and test to make sure this is working with the endpoint that we've defined. So to test this, we'll open up a new browser tab. We'll type in localhost and the port that it's listening on, 3000. And then we'll type in the API route, API/get JWT token. And as you can see, it sent us the message that we expected. So now we're going to go back and we're going to add the call to get the Curve JWT token. Let's take a look at what Curve endpoint we're going to use. And if you want to look up the documentation, you can go to our partner portal, click on API reference, that will load Stoplight. Under the administration grouping, security, we're interested in generate widget security token. It accepts the HTTP post method, and the highlighted portion is always the API endpoint path. Everything prior to it needs to be your Curve instance URL. There are several required properties that you'll want to pass in the request body to this endpoint. We're going to go over each one and what they do and why we need them. Starting with version, it defaults to 1, but we're going to set it to 2 to support the higher payload number. The second is expires in. This defaults to 1 week. It can be as low as 1 second, as high as 1 year. This determines what amount of time the token we're going to generate will be valid. So we're going to keep it at 1 week. And then we need 4 more properties that are required. We need app ID, which is the ID of the application that contains the content that we're intending to embed in the widget. We also need to pass the user ID, which is the ID of the composer user who owns the application. This is the user, to be clear, who created the application, not necessarily the user who created the asset that we're trying to embed, like the dashboard. So it's whoever created the application, that's the owner user, that's the ID that you want to pass for user ID. We also need to know who the end user is, and that's why the client ID property is required. For this tutorial, we're going to keep things simple. We want to embed the dashboard widget with access to all of the dashboards that you've been creating. So for that reason, we're going to set client ID to the same value as user ID so that we have all of the permissions and all of the dashboards available to us when we embed. We also need to pass org ID. Org ID is the organization for which the user belongs to. And to keep things simple, we want to give this user all access to all the dashboards that we're building in this simple example. So we're going to set org ID to org:0. You'll see in the embed code that org ID is a required property and it's set to org:0. That just means it's the parent master organization. So with that, we are going to go back to Visual Studio Code. We're going to make this API call, and I'll show you where these properties get configured. So now I'm going to replace this simple JSON response. that we use to test the endpoint with the actual call to get the security token. I'm going to use the Axios framework to do it. Here is the URL. Remember, you'll want to replace everything up to dev API with your Curve instance URL. Here are the required properties that we just discussed. And remember, you'll want to use the app ID and the user ID for your application that you want to embed. And if you don't remember where to get these values, anytime you're in Curve Composer, there's always widget embed code on the top right. You can click that button and it will show you the value for app ID and for user ID to use. And you can just copy and paste it. Remember, we want to set client ID to the same as user ID, and we're going to set org ID to org:0. That will give us full access to the embedded widget. And remember to use your specific Curve instance API key and pass it here with this special header X API key. So now we're going to save this, and now what you'll want to do is restart the node server so that it uses the updated code. If you've invoked the node server from a terminal, you can hit Control-C, that will stop the server, and then enter node space app.js to restart the server. So with that, let's test it. Okay, so after restarting my node process, and my server is now listening again on port 3000, I'm going to go ahead and run our REST API endpoint. This time, notice that I have a JSON response with my JWT encrypted token as the value for my token property. And with that, we now have a fully functioning Node.js backend process generating Curve JWT tokens. Thanks so much for watching.